So the base from the reprojection is now it's a clean base, but it's very clean. Which is a problem.
There are parts of the mesh that we couldn't reproject onto just because the mesh is too close together.
Yeah, exactly. And this is the reason when I'm sculpting, I never take the model to a final version. There might still be brushstrokes in it, and the design is there, but we don't have pores. We don't have any of the fine details. Because let's face it, if you have to like resculpt the eyes and you spend a day sculpting the eyes, I mean that kind of sucks.
Yeah. So like distributing it out before and like planning ahead when it comes to UVs and reprojection is a really good idea. And that's the reason why we're also preserving, like we're waiting with UVs.
Yeah.
Like, cause even the stuff we're doing now, it might be minute changes and it's not like overall like design changes, but we're still changing the surface, which potentially could lead to some stretching in the UVs if they were there already.
And having UVs with no stretching is pretty important. But we get more into that in the UV chapter.
So many times the texture artist is just like, what's happening to my UVs?
Yeah, exactly.
So you want to make your texture artist happy, especially if it's yourself.
Yep. So sometimes at work I've been like, who's the idiot who did the UVs for this? And it's like, Henning, it was you. And you face the consequences.
Yeah. Oh, another just quick thing. When we're talking about eyes, you see how the lid sort of overlaps? You got the top part of the lid that overlaps with the bottom part. This is just a nice way to sort of sell the integration. You know, get a little more sagginess. Yeah. Again, because he's old. Just keep it in mind. Look at eyes.
Yeah. And here you can see, because backface masking wasn't on, when sculpting this bit here, the two surfaces kind of joined, and it's really annoying. So then you have to go back and fix it.
A really neat trick to this is the inflate brush can actually help you with sort of separating it. Because when you inflate something where two meshes intersect with each other, it sort of deflates it, and then it like separates the mesh.
Yeah.
And then you can just smooth it out afterwards.
And also you see here, like this was a genuine mistake. I should have just enabled backface masking from the beginning. But instead of erasing this from the video, we're keeping some of the mistakes in just to see how you can solve them. Because it's really useful to see how you can solve it. For instance, you have, like you just saw, you have intersecting geometry because of stupid ZBrush doing stupid things because of no backface masking. This shows you how to solve that. So you can see, for instance, the lips here now, they're very, very soft because there's literally no sculpting on them whatsoever.
Yeah, because that was just completely masked out during the reprojection.
Yeah, exactly. And now with retopology, we have an inside of the mouth as well. And so now we have so much more control here.
Yeah, when you're just sculpting the lips and there's an open hole and the mesh just cuts off, it can be a bit hard to actually sculpt in ZBrush. ZBrush doesn't understand sort of like the fall off of like when a mesh just ends. Yeah, exactly.
So what we're doing here is we're pretty much making a polygroup for the bottom bit of the face, which means that we can now just separate it out.
So if you mask something out or if you isolate something and press Control W, this will just make a polygroup based on the selection you have currently.
That's very useful.
So that's actually a shortcut I use quite a lot.
Yeah. So we also have that in the interface as well. Not Control W, but we have stuff like hide selection or delete hidden, which I use in conjunction with that as well. Yeah. You can find it on the bottom of the interface, which I use quite a lot in conjunction with make polygroup from mask.
And the ear is one of those areas as well, because it's such an intricate shape where it's reprojecting that is hard, right? Because it's such a thin area of skin, especially again when it comes to old people. Old people's ears are very thin, like because the skin just, I don't know, it just tends to disappear a little bit. I don't know if it's because there's a limited amount of skin and when they grow when they're bigger, but old people's ears are tend to get a lot more, it's not bony, but just thinner. Yeah. So think about that as well.
And you see here, if we'd done UVs before we did the sculpting pass here, we wouldn't be able to change the shape here. Like, I don't care if I'm changing the shape to this point here, because I'm going to do my UVs afterwards. If we had done our UVs before this, that would mean that we would have to go back and just re-unfold them or relax those specific shells. and you don't want to do that. You know, it's fairly trivial to do it. You just don't want to.
Yeah, you could, but it's like it's a waste of time to do it twice.
That said, though, you might end up as you learn or as you do texturing that you have to update your UVs, and we do go through that later on, how to update your UVs later on. Like, let's say you've been sculpting for like 20 hours, and with UVs we do cover how to update the UVs of your ZBrush model. So, you know, if you have to update your UVs, it's perfectly fine. It's just you know, it's just a bit annoying.
And this is like, this isn't the final stage of detailing the mesh.
No.
This is the step before we get into the final pour and that kind of detail. You still have, you can still play around with the mesh a little bit and add irregularities to the skin. You know, maybe there are fat deposits building up somewhere, and maybe you have some spots on your face or something like that. There's still a lot of opportunity to play around before you sort of nail down the final part of it. Yeah.
And also, when it comes to like the final details, while we've been saying that you shouldn't rush them, a lot of people might hear that they aren't important, but they are. If you're going for realism, the final detailing is extremely important.
Yeah, that's really what ties it all together. Because I think that's important to distinguish, that whenever we say these things, don't rush, don't do this right now, and do basic stuff, is like, yes, you still need to do a final sexy detail pass that everyone loves.
Yeah.
At the very end.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like the cream on top. You really, I know it's like you're itching to do it.
Yeah.
And like once you get to do it, it's so satisfying, but you really want to wait with it.
Yeah, exactly. Because the reason you have to wait with it is because, yes, it's important, but let's say you have like a medium shot, like, you know, the character is at a distance, you're not going to see it. And if your character only works close up, I mean, you're in trouble. So the character needs to work from a distance. You need to be able to, you know, track out and see the camera or see the character through a camera lens from different regions.
Now, let's say you've added pores now, right? So pulling or pushing on anything on the mesh, you're going to be quite reluctant to do so, because you're like, oh, then I'll destroy the pores.
Yeah, and you have to resculpt it.
Exactly.
Yeah. And also, when it comes to pores, we're going to get more into that later on, but they're important because when you're doing the final surfacing of the character, they will really break up the specularity. You'll get all these nice little specular highlights. I know before people used to do like really like fancy spec maps and all that kind of stuff, where they took the color map and diffuse map and did like voodoo to it, but that's not physically correct at all. In fact, most of your specularity comes from a good displacement map, a good bump map. So if you want realism, specularity is essential. It's so important. And that's what professionally, when I do texturing there, I spend so much time. I spend so much more time on a bump and displacement map than I do on a spec map.
Yeah, because let's face it, in real life we don't have spec maps.
No, we have specular roughness maps, which we have a separate chapter dedicated to. But really make sure the displacement is working. It's so important. And like, hell, it's even more important than color map, you know, or just to diffuse, whatever you want to call it, in a lot of cases. Because let's say you have a dark shot, you're not going to see the color. All the color is washed out, but you're going to see the specularity. You're going to see like how shiny it is, the wet regions, and the wet regions are being broken up by all the fine details. So it's so important that you have them, but like Morten says, don't rush them.
And one of the things you can do to sort of accentuate sort of the specularity of things is push it a little further than what real life is actually like. Let's say, you know, the distance, I don't know exactly how thick an eyelid is, right? But if you make an eyelid thicker than it is in real life, it will capture a little more light than it normally would. And these are the things you can sort of play around when you see the nose, the breakup of the cartilage in between, where the nose sort of fuses together. Both sides of that, it's quite a deep crevice. And one of the things that you start to realize if you have the opportunity to look at scan data, is scan data reveals the body or the face how it actually is, with no specularity, no diffuse, nothing. And you realize how deep grooves actually are. The same with pores. Pores are way deeper than you would think. The same with eyelids, maybe they're thicker than you would think. So think about where you could accentuate these places to draw focus, like the eyes on this man, like the wrinkles underneath his eyes. There's a lot of high frequency detail, which obviously draws our attention a lot more to that. Whereas the nose and the mouth, it's fairly clean.
Yeah.
It's not fairly clean, but it's cleaner than something like the eye. So instantly, when you look at it from here, you can see we're actually drawn a lot more to the eyes.
Yeah. So that's a nice way of putting it. Yeah, essentially what Morten is saying is our eyes are drawn to detail. If you want to look somewhere, put details there. If you don't want to look somewhere, keep it.
Yeah, and the difference between, so if you made the face just equally detailed everywhere,
yeah,
it would be distracting. You would your eyes wouldn't instinctively know where to go.
It wouldn't be satisfied.
No, if you look at a regular face, the parts of your face where there's the most detail are the eyes. We have the eyebrows, lashes that sort of stick out. We have eyes that distinguish themselves color-wise from the skin. So you're automatically drawn to that area.
Yeah.
And the eyes work a lot. You do a lot of mechanical things with your eyes. Yeah. And as you grow older, those muscles that pull the eyes together, obviously they get a little more loose, and that's why the fat deposits start to sag and the muscles start to sag as well. And
also from a technical Python point of view, like Morten mentions, like make stuff a bit thicker and more accentuated, like maybe make the valleys a bit deeper and the peaks a bit taller, is once we start doing subsurface scattering and stuff, everything smooths out
a lot of that disappears.
So like realistically, maybe 50% of all the sculpting you do in a displacement map might just disappear because of just subsurface scattering. And that's a huge pet peeve of mine, how people like screw up subsurface scattering. But if you do any kind of SSS, it's going to you're going to lose details. Just be aware of that. So I would much rather see you do more like stronger details than too weak. And this is a region which is really important. This is the caruncula of the eye. That's
I love that word.
The caruncula is great. That's like the very corner of the eye. That's where a lot of guys keep forgetting it. It's this kind of like triangular wedge shape, which is just in the corner of the eye. And it's very shiny, so a lot of specularity there.
Yeah, because you have like the tear ducts are fairly close. Yeah. And there's a lot of wetness in that area.
And a lot of shape as well, actually. You can't just put like a wedge there. You have to actually sculpt it.
Yeah.
And this is something which is makes a huge difference. And the way Morten and I work, like in terms of like professionally, we work for companies which really, really value detail. And a huge difference between the work we do and companies with smaller budgets is we can afford to do that, and it really shows.
Yeah.
But doing that kind of work, putting the detail into something like the caruncula and like a meniscus as well, which would be like a wet line between the actual eyeball and the eyelid. Just adding stuff like that adds so much life and realism to your character.
And something like the caruncula is actually, you wouldn't think about it, but again, there's a lot of variation between people's caruncula. Like some people have a very flat one and very thin. Some people's it's very round instead of being triangular. So look at like different people's eyes and see sort of how is it shaped? Which shape do you like for your character?
So that's stuff you should just investigate if you want like realism character. Like investigate the term caruncula, investigate the term meniscus. So the meniscus, that's as I said, that's like kind of like the wet region between the eyeball and the eyelid.
And it's funny, like something like the meniscus is something that started showing up. It hasn't been there forever. No. Like I don't know. I feel like 5 years ago or so, that's sort of when people started paying real attention to eyes and things like that. They were like, so the meniscus was like all the rage. Yeah. You just see like teary-eyed people in games and films all of a sudden. But it's toned down a little bit more, and people seem to sort of integrate it better.
Yeah. Essentially, if you want realism, you need to go to pretty crazy lengths to get it. You can't skip out on anything. Then, because real life is so incredibly complicated. So you need to keep it. You need to pay attention to this. Obviously, if you're doing a stylized sculpt, it's not that important. But you still need to do it. Just stylize the various parts.
And you can still draw inspiration from that.
Yeah. So you can see here as well when we're sculpting wrinkles. There's wrinkles around his jaw and around the nasolabial fold and around his eyes and forehead. But between there really isn't a whole lot, because like Morten says, we kind of pay attention to where the details are. We're not just adding random stuff everywhere, because you just get confused. So just keep that in mind when we're sculpting here. Where are we placing the wrinkles? Where are we placing the details? Like the jaw here, or the chin here is just, there's just nothing there. It's a very clean shape.
Yeah, what you could have on something like the chin is maybe, you know, there are no muscles that pull massively on the chin, and so there's not a lot of, the skin isn't moving a lot throughout your life, but maybe you'll have bigger pores there because
some stubble.
Something like that.
Because that's also something you get wrinkles where there is a lot of compression, a lot of stuff happening there, which means the nasolabial fold and the eyes, you know, they're constantly moving, which means, you know, you get a lot of wrinkles there. A lot of muscles, there's a lot of muscle going on there as well. You will not get wrinkles, like, for instance, you don't get wrinkles on, like if you see a bald person, you don't get wrinkles on the bald bits of the head, because there is nothing moving there. Like the skin is just stretched there. There are no muscles, no anything pulling there. So it just wouldn't get wrinkly.
Here's a good example of how the lips actually are built up. You see this sort of like these three shapes, these three ball shapes being put together. And I think if you think about it as three ball shapes, actually, just like the top part of the lip and then the side parts that join together, that's a good way of building up volume in the lip. It's not just a flat plane. There are actually like a couple of plane changes in there.
Yeah, exactly. And then once you have those three balls in there, so you have the middle part, and then you have the two, like Morten says, on the side, then you start breaking it up. What a lot of guys do is they just add this kind of stuff right away. They're skipping what we did in our first two videos, and then you go right to this, like adding these like blemishes and like little like blisters and all that kind of stuff. You need the foundation.
And this could also be a part of like storytelling when it comes to characters. Yeah. Like, you know, someone might have really smooth lips, they're really moist all the time, but someone living in a cold environment, maybe he lived on the street, he lives on the street, he's homeless or whatever, so maybe his lips would crack a lot more.
Like this character here, I deliberately made his lips crack here. We're going to see this more in the later videos where we do like more high frequency stuff, but this is something I thought about. Like we talked about in one of the former videos. What feeling do we want to convey here? I don't want this to be a comfortable character. How do you convey that? You crack his lips. You know, that feels uncomfortable. If you have like Morten says, like really like moist and like wet, and you know, there's just a lot of, they're just healthy lips. It feels comfortable. But if you crack them, you know, it doesn't feel very nice.
Very pouty.
Yeah, exactly.
And this is also a part where like the mouth also really helps to sell the character, but more so the eyes really than the mouth, I feel a lot of the time. When you think, a lot of people when they think about a smile or a sad face or something like that, it's always connected. You always see like, I think it's like you were taught from like when you're children that, oh, it's a smiley face, you need to make it smile with the mouth. A lot of it actually goes on in the eyes. Yeah, exactly. So it's important to like find this balance between, you know, where you want your expression to take place.
Yeah, exactly. And on that note with expressions, you can't just move the mouth. If you try to like pull a smile,
everything moves.
Everything moves in your face. It's literally impossible. You mean you can take your fingers and like physically move your lips to form a smile.
But still, you would still move your cheeks, right? The fat deposits there, and the muscles would still go up and affect parts of your eyes.
So everything in the face is pretty much connected, which also makes this really hard. And that's one of the reasons something can look really like uncanny in CG. If somebody just has kind of like winged the facial expression. You just, oh, he's smiling, so I'll pull the corners of his lips upwards, which, you know, is not even close to the way it works. When doing facial expression, I mean, we'll get more into this in a facial expression video, but when doing that, keep a mirror close by and really figure out what's going on there. We're also doing a lot of asymmetry at this point here, because like we said, we now have topology here, and the topology is completely symmetrical. And that's awesome for us, because we saved a lot of time. You really don't want to add asymmetrical topology. So, by adding asymmetry now, we get a lot more visual variation into the model.
This is also where we can start to focus on integrating the hair a little bit more. Like integration with hair, we talked about this in an earlier sculpting chapter. is it really comes down to how the hair connects to the skull. And sculpting hair is obviously very different from actually having hair. You know, we're not going to be able to put in these tiny, tiny hairs that sort of make a smooth transition from hairline to skull. So what we can do instead is something like the Damien Standard brush and add these, what appears to be, well, they're not individual strands of hair, but they're bigger volumes of strands of hair. And
each strand we're doing now is essentially like maybe like 100 strands, but they still read as more individual ones.
Yeah.
Because you don't have to define everything. That would just read as noise. And as we said before, if you put details somewhere, you're gonna look there. We don't want people to look. We first want people to look at the hair at some point, but not as a primary focus.
No, and you can see like all these tiny hairs that we're adding. It's primarily at the ridge where where the hair meets the face.
Yeah.
And this is exactly where we're talking about, where the standard brush comes in handy. You have something like the Damien Standard to really make the deep grooves and make some really high peaks, and then you can accentuate parts of those with the standard brush, because it just softens out everything just a little bit more.
Yeah.
It doesn't make it as sharp and prevalent as the Damien Standard does.
Yeah. And when doing hair as well, make curves. You know, hair is not straight. It
always flows.
Yeah, it always flows to some degree. And it's a huge, huge part of people's character. Like, how would a homeless person's hair be compared to if this guy here was wealthy?
Yeah, just think of Bruce Willis with hair. Terrifying.
Terrifying.
Hair is really something you can spend a lot of time sculpting.
And we are.
Especially when you're sculpting. I mean, we even did a tutorial.
Yeah.
Like a free tutorial back in the day. Back in
2014.
Just regarding sculpting hair in ZBrush. And it's a huge subject to cover, because sculpting something like hair, which is a fine detail mesh, you know, you have all these individual hairs. You need to learn to abstract from that and not, it's like, you know, when we were talking about doing pencil drawings or whatever and just drawing every single strand of hair, it's not going to give you much.
No.
Like, sure, it might look, oh, it draws every single strand of hair. But if you just do every 100th strand of hair, like it's a little bit thicker, but you get a lot more volume and it's a lot faster. It might even look better.
Nobody's impressed by the amount of hours you put into it. People are impressed by the quality you do. So if you like, you know, you're like, yay, it's 100 million polys, and it's 6,000 strands of hair. Nobody really cares, you know. What they care about in the end, does this look good? Does this make me feel something? And if the answer is yes, then perfect. But if the answer is no, but guys, I made like 1 million strands of hair, nobody cares.
Yeah.
But of course, this takes time to learn. I mean, this took me years to learn, you know, simplifying it down. That's such a hard thing to do.
Just look at the ear. It's so weird.
Yeah.
Like, you've got nothing like it.
No.
There's nothing else on the body that has anything resembling this shape.
And it's just a specific shape as well. It's not just like a random thing. It's like a specific shape, which is the same for pretty much any human. Of course, individual variation being there. But the overall thing is pretty much the same. And it's just such a weird thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah, when I said it in the retopology video as well, when doing ears, I just nick one from another model. I mean, I will sculpt all this kind of stuff individually on top of that, because it needs to be done individually. Because, you know, it's a very different, like, you're doing infant's ear compared to this one. The textural quality is vastly different.
We've just done so many ears.
Yeah, we've just done so many ears. We know it now. You know, like, of course, if you're learning this, you know, of course, do it yourself. Do it properly. Don't cheat. Then you're just cheating yourself. But, you know, we've done this for a while. And particularly in production, if you're in production, just cheat and steal and rob and, you know.
Like, it's just, people want deliveries fast.
Yeah.
So
nobody cares how you got it done if you're in a professional production. Then it's just, does it look good? Did you not violate any major copyright laws? If so, then maybe it's still fine.
Yeah.
It's more, can anyone tell you stole this?
And if you made a previous model than yourself, then, you know, you're good.
Yeah, exactly.
And the ears ears are, once again, very, very different from person to person.
Yeah.
It's, I remember someone saying once that it's like a fingerprint.
Yeah.
And it's that's pretty accurate. Like there's so much variation in an ear.
It's interesting because like there was so much variation, but the core structure is the same.
Yeah.
Everyone has like the helix, anti-helix, and all that is the same thing, but like so much proportion-wise, texture is vastly different. One thing we should talk about here, which we don't actually do in this video, is teeth. When people forget to do teeth. Yes, not doing teeth there because the character is his mouth closed. But let's say you're doing a digidouble. You're doing essentially a digital double of somebody famous. You can't chuck in a generic pair of teeth there.
No.
If you do that, it's going to look weird. It might look perfectly fine when the mouth is closed, but the moment you open the mouth and the teeth are different, like imagine like Tom Cruise's teeth are very different from Ian McKellen's teeth. You can't just use a generic set there. You have to go that deep into it because it's just not going to feel right. And also the placement of teeth as well is very important. That's something which is really easy to screw up as well. Just where do you place them? Where are they supposed to be? Are they at the same line as the lips? Are they below? Are they above it? A lot of variation here as well. So you just have to look at the skeleton here and just like really figure out what's going on there. Because teeth are very important. Even though we're not covering it.
All that aside, we don't care about teeth, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because this tutorial is long enough.
Yeah, he's slowly getting there. And it's getting to a point now where the detail we're adding gets smaller and smaller and smaller. Yeah. So, we're approaching sort of the final stages, approaching like making final wrinkles and all the stuff that needs to be there, getting it prepped for what we call sort of like high frequency detail. Yeah. That's something that's so small that it really doesn't affect any sort of silhouette or shape. Yeah, exactly. Not that much.
It doesn't affect the shape at all, the high frequency stuff, but it does affect the specularity and the shading and your overall perception of it.
The feel of it, definitely. Yeah.
And one thing as well, which we totally forgot to do here, which you mentioned in the former video, is we didn't do eyebrows. Just obviously, as this here is a more stylized sculpt in terms of proportion and like the final painted look. We can sculpt in eyebrows, and that's what we're doing behind the scenes here. But if you're doing this as a proper realistic character, you need to groom them. You need to groom using something like in Modo. You're just using like the regular hair tools. If you're using Maya, which I've been using a lot, use XGen or Yeti,
something like Yeti,
something like that. But yes, this is primarily a Modo tutorial. Just you can use something like FiberMesh and in ZBrush, bring out the fibers to Modo and render them using the fur material.
And FiberMesh actually works really well. Like I've been using it a lot for brows and lashes as well. Yeah. And something like here, you could just have lashes and maybe even convert it to geometry. Yeah. And that really, lashes is something, especially for male characters, you don't really, maybe you don't think, but like everyone has lashes, right? Yeah. Lashes has the downside that it can make things look a little bit feminine. Yeah.
So you have to be careful.
Yeah, and you definitely have to play around with it. But it's something that everyone actually has.
Yeah. Yeah, you need that. Let me rephrase. You need that if you're going for realism.
Yes.
Because, again, what Morten and I are working with professionally is realism. So that's naturally what we're drawn to. We also do a lot of stylized sculpt as well in our spare time. But this is more, this is more professional pipeline and how you would do it there. Just be really, really aware when it comes to details.
Yeah, just look at that saggy platysma. So good. But yeah, just imagine if he didn't have that. He'd look 20 years younger straight away. Yeah. So you're adding a lot of age when doing this. And you have to be deliberate about this, because if you're doing, I've done this a couple of times, you're doing you're making a beautiful woman or like a child or something like that. And, you're adding details because it's cool. Then the look of beauty and youth is just gone. Yeah. This is something to do as well. You just see we're doing like small little like pimples and like small little cuts here. This is just to break up the surface. And it really helps to, instead of having this perfectly smooth surface, it really helps to, like what Henning said earlier, to really attribute a lot to the bump, the diffuse, the speck. Oh, look at that chin.
Oh,
It's
yes.
disgusting.
Yeah, I think, for the nose there, I used your grandpa's.
Yeah. Oh, my grandpa's nose. That's something special.
Such a good
See, that's
nose.
and you have to think about it. Like, he's an old person. He might have, he was a sailor, so he was out in the sun a lot
And you can tell.
and damaged his skin. Drink a lot of beer and stuff like that. All that kind of stuff.
It's a
Just
proper
really
grandpa sailor.
exactly. It really helps to deteriorate your skin a lot. So
Yeah.
think about that. Like, what kind of life
Yeah.
have they had?
So important. A sailor drinking lots of beer, and compared to the same somebody who maybe was in the same like class, same age, but they've been as a secretary their entire life.
Yeah.
Their skin is just so smooth. It's
Yeah,
like
they haven't been damaged by UV or
it's like
anything
transparent and like almost translucent. While Morton's grandpa has like leathery, proper leathery stuff.
But all of these things you have to keep in mind, and it really comes down to what character are you making?
Yeah.
What's the feel you want to get across? And ultimately, where is your reference from? It's so important.
And get story in every single element. Story is so important when it comes to this. If you can tell story by looking at his nose, if you can tell by his nose that he's most likely, like
An alcoholic sailor.
super drunken alcoholic sailor from the 1700s, you've done a good job. And even if you can't read a story from that, you still feel the story.
Yeah, not that you have to like make up this ridiculous backstory for everything. We just have to think about like what are the circumstances that led him to look the way he's going to look.